Rio Grande District Rangers, 1850 to 1851. Charles Bridge in Prague, 1890. The oldest bridge in Prague, Charles Bridge, 14th century, is 90% new because it has been washed away many times over the past centuries and had to be rebuilt. Many horses, Sioux Indian, January 8, 1891. The photo shows a Sioux Indian named Many Horses killing Lilton Casey near the Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota. Newspapers across the United States heralded the tragic event. A talented and popular Army officer attempting to infiltrate a hostile camp to talk peace with the chiefs was treacherously murdered by a young Sioux warrior. The death of Lieutenant Edward W. Casey shocked and saddened his friends, but also for the many horses who killed him, it epitomized the cultural catastrophe that befell the Indians after land depletion and dwindling game forced them to submit to the grim life of the reservation. Plenty Horses. Seneca Wakan Ota Plenty Horses was born in 1869. His family belonged to a clan with Chief Two Strikes, who became the most important Shichangu leader after the death of Spotted Tail. Many Horses' father, Live Bear, was a cousin of Two Strikes and a respected elder. Many Horses, tall, handsome, with broad shoulders and sloping chest, low forehead, bulging nose, and big brown eyes, looked like the epitome of the ideal Sioux warrior. But beneath the outer shell of Many Horses also lurked the cultural dilemma of the Indian generation to which he belonged. In his formative years, he was immersed in the values of the old Indian way of life, which centered on hunting, warfare, and a spiritual path connected to the phenomena of nature. He spent the rest of his years on a reservation where government officials and missionaries denied those values and sought to turn his people into Christian farmers who practiced the values of white America. The goal, as one commissioner of Indian Affairs said with unintended irony, was to make Indians feel at home in America. For Many Horses, the acculturation process was particularly intense because he spent 5 years from 1883 to 1888 at the Indian boarding school at Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. Here, Captain Richard H. Pratt was engaged in converting Indians into white men with particular zeal. Many Horses is remembered by his teachers as a quiet student of average intelligence who made little progress during his 5 years at the school. Even so, when he returned to the Rosebud Reservation, he was no longer an Indian. But he wasn't yet a white man either. At the end of the trial, Many Horses was acquitted as having committed involuntary manslaughter in a state of excitement. Lieutenant General Alexander Alexandrovich Pushkin, 1901. Conts after exchanging furs for vodka at a local merchant, 1909. Charity Tea Cart, 1909, St. Petersburg. Disposal of city garbage into the River Seine, 1910, Paris. Henry and Edsel Ford next to the first and 15th millionth Ford T automobiles, 1916. The Ford T was a resounding commercial success, for it was as good as any of its competitors, but it cost an order of magnitude less due to assembly line production. A standard 4-seat Ford T in 1909 cost $850, equivalent to $20,513 now, while competing cars cost about $2,500. Equivalent to $60,033 today. In 1913, the price dropped to $550, equivalent to $12,067 now, and $440 in 1850-1915. equivalent to $9,431 today. By 1914, Henry had produced his 10th millionth car. 10% of all cars in the world were the Ford T, production of which began on October 1, 1908, and ended on May 26, 1927. Ford Model T specifications: engine, gasoline, 4-cylinder, 2,896 cubic centimeters, developed 22.5 horsepower at 1500 RPM. Transmission, planetary, 2-speed. Body length, 3,350 millimeters. Width, 1,650 millimeters. Ground clearance, 250 millimeters. Weight, 880 kilograms. Maximum speed, 70 kilometers per hour. Florence Priscilla, Lady Norman, 1916. Czechoslovak floating prison with 400 Red Army prisoners on the Kama River near Sarapul, 1918. Miners climbing out of a mine in an elevator after a day's work, Belgium, 1920s. Residents of Petrograd rejoice at the abolition of the Dry Law, August 26, 1923. The Central Executive Committee and the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR issued a decree on the resumption of production and trade in alcoholic beverages in the country. Dry law was introduced at the beginning of the First World War. The Soviet authorities were well aware of the importance of alcohol for the budget. Already by the end of the 20s, the share of alcohol sales in the state budget amounted to about 10%. A man selling his new Chrysler for cheap after the stock market crash, New York, USA, 1929. A bachelorette party, 1931. Installation of a star on the spire of the Spasskaya Tower of the Moscow Kremlin, Moscow, 1935. A noodle delivery man in Tokyo, 1935. Bombing of Freiburg, May 10th, 1940. German pilots attacked Freiburg, a town in Baden-Württemberg. 57 people were killed in the bombing, including 20 children. The Führer laid the blame for the incident first on the French and then on the British and Winston Churchill personally. That day, 3 Luftwaffe planes flew from the airbase Landsberg-Lay and headed for the French city of Dijon. But the pilots went off course and accidentally dropped bombs on the German Freiburg. The air defense sentries suspected nothing, recognizing their own. Only after the attack began did the air raid siren sound. 69 bombs fell on the city, killing 57 people, including 20 children. The German top brass decided to cover up the incident. The press was told that the strikes on the city were carried out by French aviation. In December 1940, Adolf Hitler blamed the British, namely Prime Minister Winston Churchill. In retaliation, the Führer promised to raze London to the ground. After the end of World War II, it was reported that the 51st Luftwaffe bomber squadron had made a mistaken raid on Freiburg. In the early 1990s, a memorial stone was erected in the city to commemorate the victims of the incident. 2 old British trophy tanks, Ricardo, Smolensk, 1941. A soldier from a Maxim machine gun, September 23, 1942. Restoration of Stalingrad, 1943. Churchill suggested to Stalin to mothball the city as it remained after the Battle of Stalingrad and turn it into a museum of memory. But the Soviet leadership decided to rebuild the city and, most importantly, its industry as quickly as possible. Already by March 1943, Stalingrad was demined. The restoration of the city acquired the character of the all-Union program. In the summer of 1944, the photo newspaper of the main political department of the Red Army made a thematic issue devoted to Stalingrad. Hero of the Soviet Union, Natalia Mechlin-Kravtsova, the end of World War II. By the end of the war, she had flown 982 night sorties in a PO-2 bomber, colored. French punish women who slept with Germans, 1945. Belgian women sleeping with Germans during the occupation, 1946. Hands-free spaghetti eating contest, 1948. Air battles in Korea, 1950-1951. Army General Douglas MacArthur had to report to the U.S. Chiefs of Staff Committee. Our pilots had encountered superior American combat equipment. Morale was falling and flying was not having the same effect, and the Sabres were no help either. The first air battle between jet fighters with arrow-shaped wing, Soviet MiG-15, and American F-86 Sabre took place on December 17, 1950. And on April 12, 1951, in the skies of Korea, there was an event that went down in the history of U.S. aviation as Black Thursday. In less than 10 minutes, the U.S. Air Force lost 14 airplanes. 10 heavy bombers and 4 fighters. 15 more heavy bombers were written off after returning to the base because of damage. And about 120 U.S. Air Force personnel were taken prisoner. The fiercest air battles took place along the Yalujiang River on the DPRK-China border. This area of the battle between Soviet and American pilots was even nicknamed MiG Alley. But the main goal was not only the destruction of the enemy. Both sides sought to capture the enemy's jet aircraft at any cost. The Soviet command decided to get the American Sabre F-86 tactical cunning. Experienced pilots arrived specially from the USSR. They had to squeeze the American plane from all sides and force it to land, i.e., take it in a box. Alas, the operation failed, 2 of our pilots died, and then the group was disbanded. Here are the memories of Georgy Savin from Novosibirsk, who was then serving as an aircraft mechanic. As they say, we slept and saw that they landed our MiG on their airfield. Such a case happened to Senior Lieutenant Alexander Moskvichev, a pilot of our squadron. In the battle, he was pinned down by 8 Sabres, clamped and led to his airfield. At the slightest deviation to the right or left, fire trails were passing by him. The pilot himself told, "There was no way to escape. I think there was only one thing left, a sharp maneuver and a ram." Here one Sabre went forward apparently to show where to follow. Moskvichev could not stand it and opened fire, hitting the Sabre. The MiG immediately received several bursts of fire. The pilot was severely wounded in the arm but was able to dive and ejected. He was picked up by Korean peasants. Then one of our aircraft mechanics went to Korea to pick him up. Apparently, the Americans also realized that to land the MiG-15 business is futile, and then the Americans make a move horse, scattered leaflets which promised first $100,000 and then $1 million to the one who will bring them a whole MiG. In short, the Americans decided to buy MiG-15. At the helm of the Soviet MiGs flew not only our but also Chinese and North Korean pilots. The American command made a tempting offer. Over the territory of the DPRK, they massively scattered leaflets that promised a generous reward for a MiG jet fighter. And the reward found its lucky man. On September 21, 1953, a North Korean pilot, No Geum-sok, landed at the Kimpo Air Base in a Soviet MiG-15. The lieutenant said he was tired of living with red liars, and allegedly he did not connect his decision to flee the DPRK with the Americans' promises to pay a large sum for the airplane. However, No Geum-sok did receive payment for his feat. However, instead of $1 million, he was given $100,000. After his escape, he went to the United States, got a job as an engineer, and even wrote a book about his flight to freedom. Interestingly, the defector is still alive today. No Geum-sok is 90 years old and still lives in the country that rewarded him for hijacking a Soviet airplane. But the Sabre was also hijacked. It was done on October 6, 1951 by the commander of the 196th Fighter Aviation Regiment, Colonel Yevgeny Pepelyaev, later hero of the Soviet Union, the second most effective ace of the Korean War. On his account, 19 shot down American planes. Here is what the pilot himself told. The fight was sharp. We were already out of the fight. The airplane was in holes and then literally in front of the nose. Sabre. I chased him. He made a sharp turn. I reached for it, and before the pilot felt the danger, I opened fire in an upside-down position. From the place where the lantern is located, there was smoke. The car began to fall. I didn't pursue it. I realized it wouldn't fly far. As it turned out, I slightly damaged the engine and catapult. The Sabre pilot had no choice but to land the plane. I must give him credit, he did it skillfully. Planning, he reached the Yellow Sea, more precisely the West Korean Gulf, and landed on a pebble just at the moment when the tide began to ebb. The pilot left the airplane, launched a rescue inflatable boat, and swam out to the open sea to avoid being captured. Later, we learned that he was soon picked up by the rescue service. The Americans' rescue service worked perfectly. The SA-16 flying boat took the pilot to its territory, and the fighter stayed behind. 2 or 3 hours later, American bombers appeared and began to cover the area where the Sabre landed with bombs. However, the tide had already begun, and the foaming seawater safely covered the airplane. A little later, another Sabre fell into our hands thanks to the skillful work of a pilot of the 16th Air Defense Fighter Regiment of the 97th Air Defense Fighter Air Division. After the battle, the American fighter made an emergency landing on the territory controlled by North Korean troops, and the pilot was captured, and the F-86 airplane was promptly transported to Andong Airfield. Sadako Sasaki is a girl from Hiroshima, 1955. Sadako Sasaki is a girl from Hiroshima whose fate the whole world has learned about. At the moment of detonation of the baby, 2-year-old Sadako was at home at a distance of about 2 kilometers from the epicenter. The blast wave carried her through the window, but the girl survived. In November 1954, she showed the first signs of illness. A tumor appeared on her neck and behind her ears. In January 1955, the tumor appeared on her legs, and on February 20th, the girl was admitted to the hospital with a diagnosis of leukemia. According to doctors, she had no more than a year to live. On August 3rd, from her best friend Tezuko Hamamoto, she learned of a legend that says that a person who folds 1,000 paper cranes can make a wish, which is sure to come true. The legend influenced Sadako, and she, like many of the patients at the hospital, began to fold cranes out of whatever pieces of paper she could get her hands on. Meanwhile, Sadako's health steadily deteriorated, and on October 25, 1955, she died. It is believed that she only managed to make 644 cranes. Her friends finished the work, and Sadako was buried with 1,000 paper cranes. Sadako Sasaki became a symbol of rejection of nuclear war. Inspired by her courage and willpower, Sadako's friends and classmates published her letters. In 1959, a statue depicting Sadako holding a paper crane was erected in the Peace Park in Hiroshima City. Astrakhan factory workers put black caviar into jars, 1960. George Nissen, inventor of the trampoline, jumping on a trampoline with a kangaroo, 1960. Experimental Cancer Laboratory of the Tbilisi Institute of Oncology, 1967. U.S. President Nixon tries to eat with chopsticks at a luncheon with Chinese leaders in Beijing, 1972. Unusual traffic accident, USSR, 1979. Brenda Spencer, child shooting, January 29, 1979. On January 29, 1979, 16-year-old Brenda began firing a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle. The rifle had been given to her by her father for Christmas, at children standing outside a school from the window of her home. 8 children and a police officer were wounded. 2 adults who tried to rescue and shelter the school children from the bullets were killed. Brenda then barricaded herself in the house and did not come out for 7 hours. Eventually, she surrendered. When asked why she did it, she said, "I just started shooting, that's all. I just did it for fun. I just don't like Mondays, and this way, at least it's some fun. Nobody likes Mondays." Because of the seriousness of the crime, 16-year-old Brenda was tried as an adult. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and armed assault and was sentenced to life in prison with the right to apply for clemency after 25 years. She was denied parole 4 times. After a while, Brenda's phrase, "I don't like Mondays," became popular. Battleship slot machine, USSR, 1980s. A man trying to ride a hippopotamus, 1982. A policeman lights his patrol car from U.S. President Ronald Reagan's limousine, 1984. The flag of the Soviet Union is lowered and the Russian flag is hoisted over the Kremlin, December 25, 1991. Leonardo DiCaprio and Daniel Day-Lewis on the set of the movie Gangs of New York, 1999. Jenny Rivera plane crash, December 8, 2012.